And so as a result of that, Canada took a lot of, the Conservative government took a lot of action in terms of statements, and they also passed a unanimous motion in the House of Commons. Now, unanimous motion is every parliament member was involved, NDP, Liberal, Conservatives. They all united to pass a unanimous motion to hold the Iranian authorities accountable if anything happened to Saeed Malikpour. He was on death row, so it was like an urgent time. So as a result of that, with the pressure of the Canadian government, and we had a global campaign going at the time, his death sentence was called off. Then the Iranian authorities sentenced him to death a second time. And then we had to do it again. And again, the pressure got the death sentence to get called off. Since then, the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, he converted Saeed's death sentence to life imprisonment. So ever since then, usually the media stops caring once there's no death sentence anymore. It becomes less of a urgency. And since the Trudeau government has come as the new government, it's been extremely difficult to get human rights news into the media. I don't know. I'm letting you know from my own experience. It's extremely difficult to get human rights news in the media right now. And they don't want to talk about Saeed Malikpour because the idea is, let's not anger the Iranian authorities. We're trying to engage with them. Let's not anger them by talking about human rights. And this is a very dangerous mentality to have. So I'm just hoping that the Liberal government will step up. Yes, he's not on death row anymore, but he has a life sentence. That's a death sentence on its own. And he's already suffered for 8 years in prison. He's been extremely tortured. His jaw has been broken. They pulled out his fingernails. They've done horrible things to this man, and he's completely innocent. So all we want is for Justin Trudeau just to speak out, Minister Dion just to speak out, just to say his name and in a statement. And so far, they have refused to do so.
And not angering the regime would be probably the biggest motivator in this case for him not to be mentioned since the last death sentence was cancelled.
Yeah, so Saeed, the people who have him, who are holding him hostage, is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. A branch of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps called the IRGC Cyber Army. They actually established this cyber army with Saeed. The first case was Saeed. They actually arrested Saeed to inflict fear on civil society because blogging was a huge deal in Iran in 2008. So they wanted to stop Iranians from expressing themselves online. So they used Saeed Malikpour as this scapegoat to do that. Because Saeed Malikpour he was studying at Sharif University in Iran. It's the most prestigious university in Iran. It's Sharif University of Technology. He graduated from there, and then he moved to Canada to pursue his PhD. And so that's why he was in Canada. Now, to the regime, when he came back to visit, he was a perfect target for them. Here's this man who went to the most prestigious university in Iran. He was so, this is the narrative that they're building. This is not my narrative. But he was so ungrateful, he was so ungrateful and he decided to move to Canada. And he got corrupted in the West because the West is so corrupt. And that's when he started a porno site. And that's the whole idea. And now the porn site was actually running inside Iran. And it was one of the most popular websites in Iran. Iran is a sexually regressive country, and it was one of the most popular sites in Iran. So they're trying to show that Saeed is trying to corrupt the minds of Iranians, and they put him in prison as a result of that. By doing so, they're sending a big message to regular Iranians and saying, look, if we can do this to a guy who went to the most prestigious university in Iran, then went to Canada and was a permanent resident of Canada, if we can do this and we don't care about the repercussions, imagine what we can do to you. No one even knows who you are. No one cares about you. And they were very effective through arresting Saeed Malikpour and sentencing him to death. They were able to suppress Iranian civil society from expressing themselves online. The IRGC controls majority of Iran's economy. It is to the IRGC's advantage to have to reestablish relations with Canada. When Justin Trudeau became the Prime Minister of Canada, the IRGC media in Iran was very happy. They expressed a lot of happiness towards this. They do want re-engagement. So hey, if Canada wants to re-engage with Saeed Malikpour's hostage, like the people who are taking him hostage, and refusing to mention his name, what message does that send? It sends that we don't care about human rights. We don't care that you have Saeed Malikpour, and we're willing to re-engage with you anyways. So this is wrong. They have to speak out. It's just unacceptable.
Just to respond to your sub-question on why the Canadian government has, maybe are they scared of angering the Iranian regime? I don't know the answer specifically to that question. The Canadian government hasn't said publicly why it's not raising this issue, so I can't conclude that you're right or wrong. I just want and I don't want to be the bad guy in the room, but to try to throw a bit of caution on the role or the weight of human rights in foreign policy. Human rights are one priority of a government, hopefully. For some governments it's not. For the Canadian government, European governments, the American government, it's a priority, but there are strategic priorities, diplomatic priorities, consular priorities, trade priorities, other priorities, and foreign policy is about calibrating all of these different things. That doesn't mean that human rights shouldn't count, but they should be one priority among many others. And as other priorities, one shouldn't hold the entire portfolio of priorities hostage. So that's not to say that human rights shouldn't matter, but they are one variable among others. And that's the reality that I'm describing, and to be perfectly transparent, I agree with that reality. When you add to that general reality that Canada has extremely limited, at best, influence in terms of shaping things inside Iran, or Saudi Arabia for that matter, or China, that is not an argument to dismiss or to displace the human rights variable in the equation of foreign policy, but it's a sobering one. And it clearly, in my view, is a reason not to have human rights, and this is not pleasant, but it's a reality, hold the other priorities hostage. Now, also nuance that with the fact that the other priorities, as I mentioned earlier on, are not big priorities for Canada. But why is Canada behaving in this way in the case of Saeed Malikpour? I don't know specifically. We don't know. But let's keep in mind this bigger picture too.
Is there one final question at the back? Maybe we'll see if we can do 2 quick questions.
I'll try to make it very quick. I'm Sharan Golestani with Iran Democratic Association. If I want to rephrase what the last speaker said, I'll call it appeasement. Nothing more than that. Now, this is the same argument that Chamberlain used in the Second World War. And you may disagree, but human rights is the pillar of our modern and contemporary world. The UN and the UN Charter was based on the human rights issues. I totally agree with Mariam about the argument. Indeed, Iran needs re-engagement, so let's make our priority be heard, loud and public, that these are the things that we are interested in, otherwise, sorry, too bad, we cannot re-engage. So, what is disturbing is that at the very same time, I just want to make this to all our panelists, let's not make it a domestic Canadian issue of liberals versus conservatives versus NDP. This is a matter of consciousness for all human beings, and this is what I hope, that we don't make it a political hostage to partisanship, basically. We have here members of parliament from all parties, but we had also unanimous motions on many things that the Canadian Parliament passed, and we hope that the government follows through those unanimous motions, including the recognition of 1998 massacre of political prisoners in Iran as a crime against humanity. That was a unanimous motion. So it was not liberals versus conservative versus NDP, a unanimous motion. Let's make the government accountable and answerable to those motions that unanimously was passed in the parliament. Thank you.
Just before we get right to it, I'll just take that very last question as well, and then maybe we'll just respond to both. I saw one other hand there. Yes.
Hi, how are you? There are 65% of Iranians that are below the age of 40. With that statistic in mind, isn't it wise for Canada to just remain ambivalent, or better yet, to remain static in light of everything, until the Iranian youths mobilize themselves into some form of reform or change? In other words, is the Canadian government even necessary, strategically speaking?
Thank you. So I'll let the panelists respond to both of those if they wish.
Sure. On the first point, first of all, I'm sorry to be blunt, but any parallel to appeasement and Chamberlain is I'm trying to be polite, but it's nonsense. And I think frankly, it discredits you to make those allegations. Second point, I said human rights should be a priority among others. I didn't say that they shouldn't matter, and if anything, if we want to expand on that, the promotion of human rights as a priority of foreign policy works best in tandem with others. Human rights, as I think you said, and I fully agree with that, you won't get improvements of human rights in North Korea by completely isolating the regime. If there is to be a chance of improving human rights in Iran or any other country with time, it'll come with engagement. Engagement through trade, engagement through academic exchanges, student exchanges were mentioned, and so on. It improves like that with time. The third point that I'd like to make, and I'll finish on that, is very, very few people that I've met who talk about, and there are some exceptions clearly, who talk about human rights in Iran actually mean human rights in Iran. Where are the people who talk about human rights in Saudi Arabia? Where are the people who talk about human rights in China, in Morocco, in multiple other countries, in the US, in other countries, in Canada? A lot of the people who disagree with our relations with Iran do so for strategic reasons, because they don't like the regime. For good reasons, but they don't like the regime because it disagrees with us, so they raise the human rights issue. And in my view, that is largely the case for the previous conservative government. The human rights issue was an excuse to criticize, isolate, shun a regime that they didn't like for non-human rights reasons. And this ultimately is more hypocrisy than anything else. I don't know if that's your case, I don't know you, but generally that's the case. So the human rights issue, they matter, but most of the time, you know, where are the complaints on Saudi Arabia, on China, on Morocco, and so on?
Constantly made by the same people.
Yeah.
Anyone else for that first question, or the question on the young people in Iran?
Yeah, and I'll very briefly talk about young people in Iran. I mean, I think that's an enormously positive statistic. I think Iranians will ultimately be the ones who free themselves. And I think it'll be Iranian young people. I hope it's, as I said, I hope it's a nonviolent process. I think it's more likely to be nonviolent if it's a gradual reform rather than revolution. But yeah, I mean, look, the primary actors in Iran's story, of course, are going to be Iranians. And I have a lot of faith in Iranian youth. I think Canada can play, of course, a limited, but Canada can play a supporting role in that process.
Canada, Iranian, I work with Iranian, my colleagues are inside Iran, and Iranians love Canada, and Canada is a champion of human rights. Well, that's the image that they give to the world. And as a result of that, it's very important that Canada speaks out about human rights. Ultimately, it is the Iranian people who are going to bring change to their country, but people cannot fight, Iranians cannot fight for their freedom if they do not have confidence and they don't believe in themselves. So we have to give them moral support. Without moral support, Iranians will not rise up. And right now, they're a young population, but you know, as the years go by, they're going to get older, and then this younger population, they're isolated and they're alone, and we don't know if they're going to be as non-violent as the current young population. Right now, yes, the civil society in Iran is non-violent. They've proven that in their protests, but we don't know about the younger ones that are coming up. So we have to be very careful to not isolate Iranians. And yes, there are people out there who use human rights for political gain, but that does not take away from the fact that there's human rights violations in Iran. We cannot ignore the human rights violations in Iran just because there are people who take advantage of it. That's a very irrelevant point.
Well, Well, it is a passionate topic, but I want to say thank you. No, absolutely. We were talking about that before, and I really want to thank the three panelists for being here and sharing their views and furthering a discussion that is, I think, on the Canadian government's agenda, whether it's at the top of the list or not. And I think we're going to hear more discussion on it. So I thank everyone for coming and for your interest in the topic. And I also want to thank the three organizations that helped bring this event together, and that's SIPS with the University of Ottawa, the Baha'i Community of Canada, and the organization that brought me here, which is Open Canada, and the Centre for International Governance Innovation. Thanks very much.